Hello everybody, thanks for coming back. I'm going to talk about a difficult topic today, and it happened to me personally. This has to do with slavery and slave owners in Canada and how they got here, and they are still here. I worked with them when I worked for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans as a biologist. It's a bit of a long story because I'll just tell you about this person who used to own slaves. She comes from Jamaica. Her name is Bridget. Her and her family had a very large sugar plantation. And at the time that they were involved with the sugar plantation, they owned slaves, black people. And when I got the job with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, I won a competition, by the way. 3 people competed. I was the winner. And so she was brought down from, she was a biologist working here in Vancouver, and she came from another area of the province, somewhere north of us, I've forgotten exactly where. And she had been working under contract and then got the job as a biologist level 3. And when they hid her, in fact, because she, under contract, she had a technician who was quite sketchy in his background, very, very sketchy, in fact. And he's directly responsible for the death of a First Nations person, which we call First Nations. Now we've changed it all, of course. And 2 other First Nations people. He is directly responsible. I've worked with him, and he has recounted the story of this man's death twice to me. And that is criminal negligence. To my knowledge, there was no investigation. There should have been, but it got covered up. The government of Canada didn't like it. I know who these people are who are involved. Bridget confided in me several times about it. It seemed to be on her mind a bit, let's say. But I want to get into her background first, let's say. So in Jamaica, slavery was common. But a man came to power. His name is Michael Manley. And Michael Manley, being the leader of Jamaica, he ended slavery. I would like to have a picture of Michael Manley. I don't have one. Anyway, as she told me herself, and this is from her own, almost a confession, really, they knew the storm was coming, so they gathered as much cash as they could. They put it in a suitcase. They hired a single-engine plane, her and her family, and they flew from Jamaica to Miami Airport in the middle of the night. And they made it, of course. So they were on the run. They escaped. And when they got to Miami, the Department of Immigration didn't like the fact that they were on American soil, since America has a rather difficult history with slavery of black people. Slavery is not just for black people. However, in America and in North America, probably, it was prevalent, let's say. So anyway, the government of the United States decided to move them. And they moved them to Toronto, Canada. Now, this happens quite a bit. In our history of Canada, if we seem to get people who are not exactly welcome in the United States, and they end up in Canada, and we sort of, for some reason, we make them fit in someplace. So Bridget herself said that when she came to Canada, she didn't like it. It was too cold. So her and her family found that the warmest place was the city of Vancouver. So they flew here, which is where I'm working right now, and where this is being filmed. So she got a job where I used to work at a company called J.O. Thomas and Associates, and her job was, they call them pin. You'd look for pins in the nose of salmon, and the pin has a micro signature on it that tells you what hatchery it was released from. And she had a fortuitous meeting with an older man at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, a senior man, who really took a shine to her because she had, being from a very wealthy family, as she said, there was only Rolls Royces and Jaguar V12s in their parking area. If it was less than that, they had to park them on the street. And I talked to her about her slave time. And if anybody's ever seen the movie Django, those things happened in Jamaica. I couldn't talk for a while. When she is going on about her life in the plantation, you shake your head. It makes your blood run cold to listen to those stories. And I thought, my God, you're on Canadian soil, and how did you even get here? But anyway, this older man, I've met him, Department of Fisheries and Oceans. He was married, was a couple of kids or something. An older guy, though. He took a real shine to her because she's a party girl. She's a Jamaican party girl. And she has I had at this time a friend named Neil Schubert. We were biologists together. So he started to date her, and he was very impressed. She likes sex. Let me just put it plainly. She likes sex. And I think, because I know this old man a bit, he convinced her to stop being a technician at J.O. Thomas and Associates, and he got her enrolled at the University of British Columbia. And she was paid to go for a Bachelor of Science degree and a Master's degree in Science. It's not her idea. It's his idea. And he got her paid to go through Temporarily Yours for 6 years. And she told me, she said, I made more money as a full-time student at the University of British Columbia than I did working for J.O. Thomas and Associates. I thought, now, isn't this interesting? I, of course, had student loans. I was in a 4-year program, Bachelor of Science, and, you're out of money. You might like to continue with the master's degree, but you're out, and your debts are climbing, and you don't have a job. She did not have to worry about a job. She stayed in residence at the University of British Columbia, and she can drink rum, Jamaican. What was the name of that rum? Because she demanded a bottle from me. Appleton's 151. Anyway, I will tell you about the bribe demand later. So when she got out of university, this old man from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans gave her a sole-sourced contract, a contract that did not go up for competition. And it's on the Nechako River, northern British Columbia. So she went there. And she hired this guy who used to, the only way I know him is he babysat her dog. And he couldn't get out of grade 10. I know that about him because I worked with him for a little while. And because of him, a First Nations person died tragically, violently. And 2 other First Nations people were injured. So she fired all the Indians on her crew and just kept the white people. In her own words, she said, this is what I've done. So listening to people talk like that you work with, and there's no investigation about this man's death. He'd probably like to still be alive and enjoying his life with his wife and family, but he's dead now. I could tell you the details of it, but they're really quite. It's violent. I'll put it that way. It's violent. First time I heard the story from this man who couldn't get out of grade 10. He went on, by the way, to become a biologist level 2 at the Department of Environment. And I don't know how you get to be a biologist level 2 at the Department of Environment in Canada, and you couldn't get out of grade 10. How big is the bribe there? I mean, the bribe's going to be huge. Anyway, on and on it goes. This is the way it is in Canada. This is how we do things. We shouldn't be doing things like this because there's no integrity, there's no principle, and certainly no integrity in it. And people do die. They really do. I don't know what happened with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police because it is their jurisdiction. I don't know if there was an investigation. I've never heard of one. I know that nobody was arrested, nobody was charged. But this person that I'm speaking of, he has a criminal background, according to Ms. Enivor. I'm quoting her. And when I worked with him, I thought, you are a violent person. He has an anger control issue. So, we all go through our training together, swift water training, rescue in the water, and all those kind of things that you have to do when you're an employee of the Government of Canada for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. These things are a requirement, so I went through it. Bridget Enivor and I did the same thing together. And being in her company, I hear more and more stories about the plantation and what it was like to own slaves, and, you really can't believe it. So I started to raise issues about this thing, and my fellow biologist, Alan MacDonald is his name. He and I were in the company of Ken Wilson as well. And he said to me, he says, Terry, you know, you have to be careful because in Jamaica, if you were in Jamaica, they'd bury somebody like you under the front lawn. And I laughed. I said, the front lawn? He says, yeah, they bury the black people under the back lawn, and the white people get buried under the front lawn. Because in Jamaica at that time, there was effectively no law. It was a slave state. You could kill people with impunity. You would never suffer any ill effect because they're slaves. So I asked Mr. McDonald, because I'm new to slavery. I didn't know very much about it. So he said, well, the problem with the slavery in Jamaica is that all the slaves are indentured to the crown. I said, the crown? He said, they belong to the Queen of England. But anyway, this indentured thing, it's a long, nasty story. However, I didn't know. And in fact, later on in life, you get to the point where the Queen was asked to apologize for owning slaves, and she's refused to do it, even to this day. She's an old woman, but she has never apologized for owning slaves. She inherited them. She didn't actually make them, I suppose. However, let's just move on to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Bridget Annabore, whom I used to work with. Ken Wilson, who was my direct supervisor. Well, Ken Wilson always said, "I'm not your supervisor. We work together here." And so we had a pilot sales program with the First Nations people, and I helped to train people. And Bridget Annabore got hidden. She went to Lillooet to work for the summer because she has Indian blood on her hands, and the department was afraid she was going to get found out, and then there would be friction on the water. The First Nations people, when they discovered that one of their own is dead in the water of a violent incident, and she's the supervisor, and it's one of her employees who's, I would guess, they're close friends, who's responsible for this man's death. You know, the more you learn about these things, I just was shaking my head after a while, like, why are these things happening in Canada? What is going on here? What happened to the Canada that I thought was our country? And you know, we have a just society, as Pierre Trudeau used to say when he brought us a new constitution in 1981, and he wrapped up all the rights of Canadians and he gave them to the judges. He took all the rights from Canadians and gave them to the judges. They're not ours. We don't actually have any. Actually, there's just one, which is kind of silly, but he left us with one right. So anyway, it is not a just society. It is not. The judges of Canada are all under the umbrella of the government of Canada. They are not independent. They cannot make a ruling against the Crown. I know this from my own experience. They can only make a suggestion to the Crown. And as government employees have said to me when I've contested these things and I ask questions about this thing, they say, look, even though you won your case in court, the judge cannot order the Crown to do anything. And you're getting nothing. So you go through all this process, you spend a lot of money and a lot of time, and you think, oh yeah, I won. But the Crown says, no, you didn't. Now, Pierre Trudeau made these changes in 1981. Before that, judges could make orders and the Crown had to pay for ruining your life, destroying your career, you know, destroying you as a person, which is happening now like gangbusters. We have 45,000 unheard cases in Canada where the Crown has abused the people of Canada. And Canada will not allow the judges to hear the case, even if it did. And I'm one of those people who's been successful. I'm one. On 3 occasions I've been successful. But it's always the same. It is a suggestion only. It is not binding. But I can tell you this, when the judge makes an order against me, it's goddamn well binding. Very, very binding. I'm watching the clock because I ran over last time. Pardon me. Anyway, just to tell you, although I won the competition for an EG5, they wouldn't pay me as an EG5. They wanted to save their money. And they didn't pay my overtime, and they didn't pay my mileage on my car. I protested these things, and it gets you nowhere, I can tell you. They say, well, we need to buy a car, so we're saving the money. Ken Wilson was the guy directly, my supervisor. He was in charge of my paycheck. He said, you don't like it, you go get a job somewhere else. So I went over his head. I went to Frances Dixon was the area manager. I went directly to her. You have to pay me properly. I need to get paid. And she said, I'll look into it. So about a week later, Ken Wilson calls me in his office, and we shared the office actually. He said, we got to fix your paycheck here. We got to do this properly. You're not supposed to get paid as an EG1. You're supposed to get paid as an EG5. He said, I'll take care of it. Well, what happened to him was he got angry with the department and he quit. And I worked with him quite a bit. I've been at his house. I've broken bread with him and his wife and children. And as he told me in confidence, he said, I have never worked for more than 2 years for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. I have always quit. He said, I just can't stand it. I hate this job. I said, well, why do you keep coming back? He says, because I can't seem to make much of a living when I'm not working as a biologist here. So my wife, who was at that time a biologist level 4, I think she was till she retired, my wife hires me back. I said, she does? Yeah, she does. So I spoke to Al McDonald about this after this, and Al McDonald said, do you know that there are 6 people just in this building were husbands and wives here? That's 3 couples, right? I said, really? He said, you know Mel? I said, yeah, I know Mel. Mel is my wife. Really? He says, you know Ken's wife, Carol Cross. I said, why don't the women use their married names? He said, because people would figure it out. It's nepotism. And we don't want anybody to know. Oh, that's why. Yeah. And there was one other couple. He said, so you better be careful what you say. He says, and here he says, it's nepotism. And he says, it's even what I would call incestuous hiring. So there's quite a few people here have their children working here as well. Oh my God. That does not lead to good science. When I started in this business, it used to say, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, they had a moniker that said, excellence in science. It's gone now. It's been taken off. But this is where nepotism brings us all. The salmon fishery, and I worked in the salmon fishery, has failed. It continues to fail. And the fishermen have said, this is a management problem. Management is not doing their job. Well, as Al McDonald said, there's 3 couples in here. He said, my wife's department, I just want to tell you one of Al McDonald's anecdotes. He said, she's got a very big problem in her department. He said, and I have tried to straighten her out. He said, guess what that gets you? I said, what does it get you? A lot of dead air. He says, and very quiet dinners. Oh. He said, eventually I had to shut up, or I'm going to have to learn how to cook craft dinner. Because she balked, she's going to do it her way, and it's going to be her way. So, he says, that's where it ended. So anyway, Bridget Underwood is alive and well in Canada. Because she demanded a bribe of me and I wouldn't pay it, she destroyed my career. Ken Wilson helped her do it. He was, he quit actually, and he became, it's funny, he became a contractor with First Nations people, but he helped to hide the death of this First Nations guy in the water, a very violent death. He helped to hide it, and then he ended up working with the First Nations people. My God, you know, does anybody here have any sense of principle, honor, or integrity? What is going on? So anyway, I ended up in court. I'm trying to protect my ability to make a living. I won the competition. I should be still there working. The judge looks at me, and they rub their noses, they rub their eyes, and they look at the clock. They're self-represented, right? And then all of a sudden the judge says, Mr. Wheaton, because the Crown didn't show up. There's no lawyer. Elizabeth Wolfram didn't show up. None of the other lawyers at the Department of Justice. I'm standing there by myself. I have a hearing on this day. I have served them notice of my hearing. Judge says, Mr. Wheaton, I'm giving the Crown an extra 30 days. Bang. Out the door you go. He stands up really quick, walks out. So who am I in there with? Rugby boys. Sorry, sheriffs are rugby boys. I don't know if you know about this in Vancouver. The police hire rugby boys and hockey girls. They're violent people, and when you're handcuffed, boom, you're going to get it. So, this has happened actually. I'm going to have to go on to another story because I'm running out of time. However, these are more of the I don't mind speaking out because, you know, they destroyed my career. I live in poverty effectively. The judges of Canada hate me because I'm self-represented. They will not listen, and the judges of Canada have no authority over the Crown. Not one bit. Even if you won, even if you win your case. The judge can only make a suggestion to the Crown. And Pierre Trudeau, with our new Constitution of 1981, made sure that the government of Canada would be protected from the people of Canada. And he used to do this weird, He was good at manipulating the media. He used to say this: "Welcome to the Just Society." Our new Prime Minister's name is Justin Trudeau. And Pierre Trudeau, his father, used to have an affair with a woman named, she's a Hollywood actress. He really liked the Hollywood girls. Kim Cattrall is her name. And when Justin Trudeau became the Prime Minister of Canada, Kim Cattrall said this: "I couldn't be more proud to be the mother of the Prime Minister of Canada." That's a quote from her. This is really weird. Anyway, I hope you're all having a good day. I have to shut it down now. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.